Hello and welcome back, dear listener, wherever you are tonight, tucked under a blanket, resting your head against a pillow, or simply lying still with your eyes already growing heavy. I am so glad you're here tonight. We are going to take a slow, gentle journey. There is nowhere to rush to. There is nothing you need to do. Just let your body sink a little deeper into the bed beneath you. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath slow down, in and out, and in and out again. We are going to visit a small stone lighthouse at the very edge of the world, where the land grows thin and the sea stretches on forever. It is called Wren, and tonight we will meet its keeper, a gentle old woman named Aloan, who has watched over this light for 60 years. This is a story about quiet nights, salty air, slow spiral staircases, warm woolen blankets, and a golden light that turns and turns and turns, so that everyone out on the water can find their way home safely. There is no danger in this story, no reason to worry, only softness and rhythm and rest. So settle in now. Let your eyelids grow heavy, and if you fall asleep before the story ends, that's all right. That's exactly what it's for. Let's begin Chapter 1. The Keeper and Her light at the edge of the world, where the land grows thin and pale, and the sea stretches on forever in every shade of gray and blue. There stood an old lighthouse named Wren. Wren was not the tallest lighthouse, nor the newest, nor the most famous. It did not appear on many postcards, but it was steady and it was faithful. And for as long as anyone in the nearby village could remember, its golden light had swept across the water every single night without fail. Wren had one keeper left. Her name was Aloan, and she was a small, gentle woman with silver hair that she wore pinned loosely at the back of her neck, and hands that had grown soft and wrinkled from 60 years of climbing stone stairs, polishing brass, and trimming wicks by candlelight. 60 years is a long time to do anything. But Aloan had never once grown tired of her work, not truly. Some nights her knees ached a little more than others. Some winters the wind howled so loudly against the windows that she had to hum louder just to hear herself think. But every evening, without exception, as the sun melted slowly into the water like a spoonful of honey dissolving into warm tea, Aloan would rise from her chair by the fire, wrap her shawl a little tighter around her shoulders, and begin her climb. The lighthouse had 108 stairs. Aloan knew this number the way some people know their own birthday, without needing to think about it at all. She had counted them so many thousands of times over so many thousands of nights that her feet now knew the rhythm better than her mind did. Asterisk creak asterisk went the third stair, the one with the loose board. Asterisk creak creak asterisk went the 11th and the 12th, always together, like two old friends who could not be separated. Asterisk creak, creak, creak. The stairs sang their slow, familiar song, and Aloan hummed along without even trying. The way you might hum along to a lullaby you heard so many times as a child that you no longer remember learning it at all. Up she climbed, past the narrow window on the 14th stair, where, if you paused just right, you could see the very first stars beginning to prick through the deepening blue of the evening sky, past the little shelf on the 30th stair where she kept a jar of dried lavender, so that the whole staircase smelled faintly of purple fields, even in the depths of winter. Past the old painting on the 52nd stair, a faded watercolor of a ship that no longer existed, sailed by a captain no one remembered, painted by an artist whose name had long since worn away from the little brass plaque beneath it. Higher and higher she climbed, her lantern swaying gently in her hand, casting soft golden light against the curved stone walls, until at last she reached the top. The lamp room was round and glass-walled, and from up here, Aloan could see the whole world, or at least it felt that way. The sea stretched out endlessly in every direction, its surface catching the last pale colors of sunset, orange fading into pink, pink fading into a deep and gentle purple, purple fading, slowly, softly, into the calm indigo of night. Aloan moved to the great lamp at the center of the room. It was old, far older than she was, a magnificent construction of brass and glass, and carefully ground lenses that bent and focused the light into a single, powerful beam. She had oiled its gears 1,000 times. She had polished its glass until it gleamed like a held breath. She knew every click and whisper of its mechanism, the way a mother knows the sound of her own child's footsteps. With practiced, unhurried hands, she lit the wick for a moment. Nothing happened but a small flicker. And then, slowly, gently, the light began to glow. It grew brighter and brighter until it filled the whole lamp room with a warm golden radiance. And then, with a soft mechanical hum, the great lens began to turn. Around it went, sweeping its beam out across the darkening water once, twice, 3 times, like a giant, sleepy eye blinking hello to the night. Far below, the sea received the light the way a quiet room receives a whispered good night. The water was calm tonight, breathing in slow, soft waves against the rocks at the base of the lighthouse. S-H-H-H went the sea. S-H-H-H, S-H-H-H, as if the ocean itself were being lulled towards sleep by the same rhythm that lulled everyone else. Aloan settled into her old wooden chair beside the window, the chair her husband had built for her so many years ago now, its arms worn smooth and pale from decades of resting hands. She pulled a thick woolen blanket over her lap, the color of soft moss, knitted by her own fingers during long winter evenings when the wind was too fierce to do anything but sit close to the fire and let the needles click quietly in her lap. She watched the light turn and turn and turn, steady as a heartbeat, patient as the tide, endless as the horizon itself. Out on the water, far in the distance, a small fishing boat made its way slowly home, its little cabin light glowing like a firefly against the vast darkness of the sea. Aloan watched it for a long moment, and though she could not see the fisherman's face from so far away, she smiled, because she always knew, that somewhere out there, the light of Ren was doing exactly what it was meant to do. It was guiding someone home. Now she whispered to the lighthouse, resting one soft hand against the cool stone wall beside her chair, the way you might pat the shoulder of an old and trusted friend. There now, just a little more light, and they'll be safe. The wind sighed gently through the small gap at the base of the window, carrying with it the smell of salt and cold stone and the faint sweetness of rain that had not yet arrived, but was surely coming sometime from somewhere far out over the water. Aloan closed her eyes just for a moment and listened to the turning of the lamp, to the breathing of the sea, to the soft, low hum of 100 quiet sounds that had become, over 60 long and gentle years, the only lullaby she had ever really needed. Chapter 2. The village below the lighthouse, tucked into a curve of the coastline where the cliffs softened into gentle hills. There lay a small fishing village called Marrow's Bay. It was the sort of village that seemed to exist outside of ordinary time. The cottages were built from the same pale gray stone as the cliffs themselves, their roofs thick with thatch, their chimneys sending up thin ribbons of smoke that curled lazily into the evening air. Fishing boats bobbed gently in the small harbor, tied loosely to weathered wooden posts, creaking and knocking against one another in a soft, comforting rhythm as the tide rose and fell. everyone in Marrow's Bay knew Aloan, and everyone in Marrow's Bay loved her, though most of them had never once climbed all 108 stairs to see her at the top of her lighthouse. It didn't matter. They knew her light. They knew her rhythm. They had built their whole lives, generation after generation, around the steady golden beam that swept across their harbor every single night, guiding their boats home long after the sun had disappeared beneath the horizon. There was old Cobb, the harbor master, who had known Aloan since they were both children running barefoot along the tide pools, collecting shells and racing hermit crabs across flat stretches of wet sand. Cobb was well past 70 now, his beard as white and soft as sea foam. But every evening, just as the light of Wren began its first slow turn, he would step out onto his small wooden dock and raise one hand toward the lighthouse in a quiet, wordless greeting. Aloan, from her high window, would always see it and always raise her own hand in return. There was young Tam, barely 19, who had only just begun captaining his father's old fishing boat, the Mary Heron Asterisk. Tam was still learning the moods of the sea, how to read the color of the clouds before a storm, how to feel a change in the wind against the back of his neck. But he had grown up beneath the light of Wren, and some nights, when the fog rolled in thick and gray, and he could no longer see the shore, it was Aloan's beam, faithfully turning, that guided him safely back to harbor. There was old Nan, who ran the village's only bakery, and who, every autumn, without fail, would send her granddaughter climbing up the 108 stairs with a small basket of warm bread and butter. For the keeper, so she doesn't forget to eat proper meals up there in that tower of hers. And there were the children, always the children, who would sit along the harbor wall in the fading light of evening, watching the great beams sweep across the water, counting the seconds between each past the way other children might count stars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 asterisk, and there it goes again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 asterisk, and there it goes again. It was, for many of them, the very first rhythm they had ever learned, long before numbers or letters or songs. The steady, patient pulse of Wren's light, turning through the dark tonight, as Aloan sat in her chair with her mossy blanket over her knees. She thought of them all, Cobb and Tam and old Nan, and the children on the harbor wall, the way she thought of them every night, gently, without hurry, the way you might think of old friends while drifting slowly toward sleep. She thought of how the village had changed over 60 years in 1,000 small ways. New cottages had been built. Old ones had crumbled and been rebuilt again. Bobbies had grown into fishermen, and fishermen had grown old and become harbor masters, and harbor masters had eventually grown quiet and still and been laid to rest in the small stone churchyard at the top of the hill, overlooking the sea they had loved their whole lives. And through all of it, every wedding, every birth, every storm, every quiet, ordinary evening, the light of Wren had turned and turned and turned. Aloan liked to think of herself not as separate from the village, but as a part of it, the last piece of a great, slow turning machine that kept everyone safe. She did not need to be down among the cottages and the harbor to belong to Marrow's Bay. She belonged to it from up here, in her glass room at the top of the world, where her light could reach every single one of them at once. Down below, in the deepening blue of evening, the village lights began to flicker on, one by one, a warm little scattering of gold against the darkening hillside, echoing in miniature the great golden beam that swept steadily above them all. Aloan watched them for a long while. Asterisk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 asterisk, and there went the light again, sweeping out over the harbor, over the boats, over Cobb's dock and Tam's Mary Heron asterisk, and old Nan's little bakery window with its warm yellow glow. Everyone was settling in for the night. Everyone was safe. And Aloan, high above them all, felt her own eyes growing heavy, lulled by the same slow rhythm that lulled the entire village to sleep beneath her hash chapter 3. The storm that never came there is a particular kind of stillness that settles over the sea just before a storm, not the crackling, electric tension you might expect, but something softer, slower, as if the whole ocean is taking one long, deep breath before it begins to move. Aloan had felt this stillness 1,000 times over 60 years, and she knew it the way you might know the particular quiet of a house just before someone you love walks through the front door. Tonight, she felt it again. The wind had shifted sometime after supper, turning from its usual gentle westerly breeze into something heavier, damper, carrying with it the mineral smell of distant rain. Far out on the horizon, where the sky met the sea in a thin gray line, dark clouds were gathering slow and unhurried, the way clouds do when they know they have all night to arrive. But Aloan was not afraid. She had weathered more storms in her lighthouse than she could ever hope to count. She knew this tower the way you know your own body. Every stone, every draft, every place where the wind liked to whistle through in winter. Wren had stood at the edge of this cliff for over 200 years, and it had outlasted storms far greater than anything the sea could summon on an ordinary autumn evening. So instead of worry, what Aloan felt was something closer to readiness. A quiet, practiced calm. She rose from her chair slowly, the way she did everything now, and moved to the small wooden cabinet beside the lamp, where she kept her storm supplies. A spare box of matches, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, a tin of extra lamp oil, a thick candle in case the wind ever found its way in and threatened to snuff the great flame entirely, though in 60 years it never once had. She checked each item slowly, methodically, her lips moving in a quiet, wordless recitation she had performed so many times it had become almost a kind of prayer. Matches, check. Oil, check. Candle, check. The same small ritual every single time, whether the storm turned out to be a fierce and howling thing, or whether, as so often happened, it simply drifted past out at sea, leaving nothing behind but a light rain and a fresher smell in the morning air. Satisfied, she settled back into her chair and watched the clouds continue their slow approach. The great lamp turned above her, unbothered, its golden beam sweeping out across water that had begun, ever so slightly, to grow restless. The waves were larger now, their tops catching pale streaks of foam, their voices deeper and more insistent than the gentle asterisk SHHH. SHHH of earlier in the evening, down in the harbor. Aloan could see small figures moving along the dock in the fatting light, fishermen securing their boats a little more tightly than usual, doubling their knots, adding an extra length of rope here and there, just to be safe. She recognized Tam's silhouette among them, moving briskly around the Mary Heron asterisk, checking each line with the careful attention of someone who had learned, from long experience, never to underestimate the sea. Aloan watched him work for a while, feeling a soft, motherly pride swell in her chest. He was a good captain already, young as he was. Careful, attentive, he would do well. The wind picked up further, rattling gently against the glass panes of the lamp room, and somewhere far below, a loose shutter began to knock softly against the side of a cottage. Asterisk tap, tap, tap. A small, homely sound that Aloan found strangely comforting rather than alarming. It was the sound of a village settling in, battening down, preparing to weather whatever the night might bring together. She pulled her mossy blanket a little higher and let her eyes drift closed for just a moment, listening to the wind and the waves and the distant tapping of the shutter and the great slow turning of the lamp above her. Asterisk creak asterisk went the lamp's mechanism, steady as ever. Asterisk whoosh went the wind against the glass. Asterisk tap, tap, tap asterisk went the shutter far below. And slowly, so slowly that Aloan almost didn't notice it happening, the storm that had gathered so darkly on the horizon began, instead of arriving, to simply drift past. The clouds, which had seemed so heavy and determined an hour before, curved gently northward, following some invisible current high above the water, carrying their rain towards some other coastline, some other village, some other night entirely. By the time the moon rose pale and round, breaking through a thin gap in the retreating clouds, the wind had softened once more into its usual gentle breath, and the sea had begun to settle back into its familiar, rhythmic breathing. Asterisk, SHHH asterisk, it whispered. SHHH. SHHH asterisk. Aloan opened her eyes and smiled, watching the moonlight scatter silver across the now calm water. There now, she murmured, to no one in particular, to the lighthouse perhaps, or to the sea itself, or simply to the quiet, settling night. Nothing to worry about after all. Below, in the harbor, she could just make out Tam climbing down from the Mary Heron asterisk. His shoulders relaxed now. His careful knots no longer needed tonight, though they would remain, just in case, until morning. The storm that never came drifted on toward some other horizon, and Marrow's Bay settled, safe and warm and untouched, beneath the steady golden turning of Wren's Lighthouse Chapter 4, MEMORAS of Tomsome Nights, when the sea was calm and the wind was gentle, and there was nothing much to do but sit and watch the light turn. Aloan's thoughts would drift backward, softly, the way a small boat drifts when its anchor has been lifted, but its sails have not yet caught the breeze. Tonight was one of those nights. She thought of Tom. Tom had been the lighthouse keeper before her, or rather beside her, for they had kept the light together, side by side, for over 30 years, back when Wren still required 2 sets of hands to manage its old and finicky mechanisms. They had met, in fact, right here, on these very stairs. Aloan had been a young woman then, barely 20, sent up from the village with a delivery of oil and matches for the old keeper who had come before Tom. And there, Halfway up the 108 steps, she had passed a tall young man coming down, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with soot smudged across one cheek from cleaning the lamp's glass, and the kindest eyes she had ever seen. "You'll want to watch the 11th step," he had told her, quite seriously, as though it were the most important piece of advice in the world. "It creaks something terrible, and it's given more than one visitor a fright." She had laughed. She still remembered the sound of her own laughter echoing up the stone stairwell. And he had smiled, and that had been, more or less, the beginning of everything. They had married 2 years later in the small stone church at the top of the hill, with the entire village of Marrows Bay crowded into pews far too small to hold them all comfortably. Old Cobb, not old back then, of course, but young and grinning, and already growing his first attempt at a beard, had stood as Tom's best.